Hey guys, welcome to TFBTV again. So here I'm in a museum in Lampang in Thailand, and what we got here is a Danish Madison that was used by the Royal Thai Army a long time ago. These actually came into service in 1902 with the Danish military. And this is interesting because it's a very successful light machine gun, magazines fed through this slot right here. Barrels right here, or the barrel actually moves with the bolt together. But it's neat because right here you can tell that there's a chakra, which means it was in Thai military service. A lot of Thai firearms had this, Thai small arms had this engraved in them. But this thing is in fully working condition. I mean, you can pop it up. I guess the barrel is plugged, but there's the bolt right there, and then the magazine would be inserted here, and then the rounds would fall out from the bottom when they're fired. And then you can obviously tell this pushes the rounds in there. Anyways, thanks for coming on the show again. Hope you enjoy this episode we have about Kabul Arsenal, Martini-Henry. It's really fascinating stuff under Abdur Rahman Khan. If you remember in some of the earlier episodes, I pointed out in some of the intros of this is where between these two hills, Golhe Azmai, Golhe Television. Anyways, hope you enjoy it and hope you enjoy the show. Thank you very much for watching, and thank you very much Ventura Munitions for sponsoring the show. So, let's talk about, Vern, let's talk about the history of the arsenal, and I also want to get into the various types that you've identified coming out of the arsenal, because if you guys realize, there is very little information on the Kabul Arsenal Martini-Henrys, even less on the actual arsenal itself. So, Vernon, can you please take it away? Tell us about the arsenal.
Sure. So my first introduction to the arsenal was myself in Afghanistan in the bazaars and looking at Martini-Henrys and picking one up, and nobody could tell me what it was. And trying to research online and trying to find more out about them. Turns out not a lot known, and what was known pretty much pointed to them being fakes. A lot of times the label Khyber pass guns put on them. As I dug and as I continued to collect and gather more information, it turns out they're a legitimate piece of the collecting choices that collectors have. And one of the things that has opened this up is the presence of our GIs and our contractors and civilians in Afghanistan over the years, and the theater allowing these to come home, which even though before the war these were in some of the gun shows and thought to be just a curiosity or a $50 fake, more and more kept adding to the sample group that people were exposed to, and more conversations started about them. What I've discovered and pieced together from other people doing their research is that the Emir of Afghanistan back in the 1880s desired to grow his capacity and his organic military capability and expand his factory production. And inclusive of that is ability to produce ammunition and guns. At the time, the Brits occupied India. They had colonial holdings throughout the world. They were the most powerful nation on earth, and a lot of that was to the Martini-Henry that they had produced. The Emir, with British support and capital, in 1885 went and met Lord Dufferin in India. As a result of that, some of the resources, money, and authorization started to flow. Prior to that, they had imported Martini-Henrys into Afghanistan, and there was gifts that followed the Lord Dufferin meeting. The factory itself probably started to assemble all the pieces and machinery that they needed from Western sources. The first set of Martini-Henrys off the production line, probably 1893. And from that point on, for 30 years, they produced various types and varieties. What I have behind me here on the wall are examples of the 7 main types and a couple of one-off sub-varieties that are in that grouping. So the types graduate chronologically through the years. As I mentioned, production probably started in 1893 and went through approximately 1923. The first guns off the line were likely these long guns, which are copies of the British Martini-Henry Mark II. Pretty much across the board, part for part, line for line, they emulate that and very likely copied almost exactly the model. There's no real distinctions that make this an Afghan gun over a British one other than minute quality differences and the actual stampings that are on it. The Brits use a proofing system, very high quality control, very high level of standardization. The Afghans, although they were a third world nation at the time, tried to emulate that to the best they could. The earlier guns are a little more rough, finished, little hand finishing to fit parts than you would have on a British gun of comparable quality. But as the time went by, they got better and better.
If you're seeing one of these, are you looking at a legitimate Martini rifle from that time period, or are you looking at something that's coming out of the craft-producing areas out of Darat and Khel or in Pakistan?
So the impetus for someone to copy one of these Martini-Henrys is more likely they're going to copy a Western Martini-Henry. There are copies of the Afghan gun, but the motivation to do that just isn't there. There's not a high return on investment for the time. It's more useful to remake an Enfield or some Western recognized style of gun. So the Type 2 is your short rifle, literally a short rifle. It's off the same production line as the Type 1 rifles. They took the parts. The only difference is the front end. It's a shorter barrel, shorter forearm. They even took the standard rifle nose cone right here, and a normal British Martini might have a tapered nose cone versus this. At some point in the manufacturing history, they started putting dates on these. These dates range from 1896 on up to approximately 1909, 1910 for this run. This is a Type 3 that I'm holding up here. It's a short rifle versus a carbine length. It's about halfway between both. Again, it's your first instance of a tapered nose piece. It's got what's called a winged guarded front sight, as opposed to the post that I just showed you. And again, these were concurrently manufactured on the product line, and they just used a shorter barrel and shorter front end to make this a carbine. This is Type 5. This is a 5.77 450 caliber as well. It is hard to tell whether they have remanufactured, remarked, and refurbished the Type 1s, or if this represents brand new parts manufactured for this gun. The sixth type that I want to show you today shows the influence of the British use of the .303 caliber bullet and the use in Europe of the 7.62. This is a Martini-Metford bore, not a Martini-Henry. It's got a wooden handguard. It's approximately short rifle length, somewhere between a carbine and a rifle. And it pretty much is purpose-built, represents a new design, and incorporates a lot of the British conventions with the forearm hanger versus the pin that normally would go through the barrel here. The ramp front sight, and again, the wooden handguard that I mentioned earlier. The manufacturing quality of these is also a lot more finished and a lot more machine professional look than some of the earlier models. And the parts, if one were to break this down, have basically a serial number stamped on almost every surface of the metal that they can find, including the two screws that hold the butt plate on.
What happened to the arsenal? What was the, the arsenal had some interesting beginnings, 1880s, 1890s. What eventually happened to it, and how did it eventually fall?
Well, there was a lot of political churn. The death of the Emir in early 1900s, his son taking them in a new direction. Some indication through contemporary sources, newspaper articles, things, that control over the populace, some little bit of insurgency going on. The factory itself, by contemporary indications, started to fall into disrepair, and production started to wane. The production actually continued through 1923, and new models were still introduced.
But 1923 is our last documented
date on a Kabul arsenal rifle.
Okay.
They may have continued, but it's unlikely.
We just don't know.
We don't know.
Right. There's
not a lot of literature on this, or if it is, it's not available to Western researchers. Mm-hmm. This Western researcher, at least. The arsenal itself, the control of it, the control of the arms that were in it, very likely went through periods where it was pilfered. Generals in charge may have sold off part of the inventory. What we see is that the ones that appeared in the bazaars, the ones that are coming back into Western collectors' hands, are rarely in pristine arsenal maintained shape. many, for lack of a better term, been ridden hard and put away wet. Yet there are still some really nice examples out there, and even if they're not a great example, they're a rare example of something that most collectors don't have in their collections.
Is there anything you want to say to the audience that will help out a lot with this? And you want to talk about your book for a little bit?
So, as I mentioned at the beginning of this, there wasn't anything out there to refer to. Just snippets online, several forums that had great interest, but not a lot of information that had been verified or validated. That situation still exists. With my interest and what I have, I've tried to share a lot of this, but there's enough material to go into a book, and I think there's interest in it, as well as the demand seems to be coming up for more information, a lot of discussion starting up in various forums. I feel that a book would fill that niche quite nicely. There's some articles being contemplated, and I think that information needs to get out there, both on the Kabul martinis and other information that collectors have that is perishable on Facebook, perishable on the forums. Put it in one place that can be a reference, and that's my intention, is to get a history of the arsenal out, a walkthrough of all the symbols and marks and time period, and put that in perspective and give basically collectors a good reference guide for that. And hopefully that'll elicit more information coming out from collectors in individual repositories.
So you hear that, guys? If you have a Kabul Arsenal Martini-Henry, get in charge with Vernon. You can get in charge with me, and then I'll pass you on to Vernon as well. But if you have one, he's very interested in taking a look at it and seeing at some of the markings and some of the more bits and pieces of it, because every Martini-Henry that we seem to come across here just adds one more piece to the puzzle and just helps complete that picture of the Martini-Henrys made in the Kabul Arsenal. Thanks, guys, for watching. I really appreciate the viewership. If you're interested, please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week on TFBTV.
And if you've got questions on Kabul Arsenal rifles, send them in.
Absolutely. We'd like
We'll do our best to answer them.